Somewhere off the coast of Singapore, at any given moment, there are over 1,000 ships waiting. Some are anchored. Some are drifting in holding patterns. Some are running circles in the strait, burning fuel, waiting for a berth to open up at a port that's already operating at maximum capacity. The world's shipping system is straining. And it's straining for a reason most people don't realize. The ships got too big. 20 years ago, a large container ship carried around 8,000 containers. Today, the largest ones carry more than 24,000. The hull is longer than 4 football fields laid end to end. The deck stacks containers 9 high above the waterline. When one of these vessels arrives at a port, it doesn't dock, it towers. And most ports on Earth physically cannot handle it. That's the problem driving a quiet, enormous global race that almost nobody is paying attention to. Countries on 6 continents are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into building or expanding deep-water ports. Not upgrading them, rebuilding them, some from scratch. Some by carving new harbors out of coastline that was undeveloped a decade ago. The world is running out of ports that can keep up with the ships. The new generation of megaports in the Indian Ocean, a port at Colombo, is being expanded into one of the largest container terminals in South Asia. On the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia is rebuilding Jeddah and adding new facilities on the Gulf Coast. In West Africa, deep-water ports at Lekki in Nigeria and Lomé in Togo are pulling in cargo that used to bypass the region entirely. In Latin America, Chanque on the coast of Peru just opened as the largest deep-water port on the western coast of South America. These projects are not small upgrades. Chanque alone cost around $3.5 billion in the first phase. The full build-out will run higher. The port can handle ships that previously had to skip the entire western coastline of South America and dock thousands of miles away. That's the part that quietly matters. Until now, much of South America's Pacific trade had to route through ports in North America, get transferred to smaller ships, and then be carried south. The new port lets the largest vessels in the world dock directly. Cargo that used to take 5 or 6 weeks to reach Asia can now move in under a month. One port, one harbor. And a continent's trade geography shifts. Why now? The obvious question is why all of this is happening at the same time. Part of the answer is the ships. The shipping industry spent 20 years racing toward larger vessels because the math was irresistible. A bigger ship burns less fuel per container. It needs the same size crew as a smaller one. It can move more cargo on the same voyage. Every economic incentive pushed builders toward giants. But giants need giant ports, deeper water, longer berths, taller cranes. More yard space behind the dock to hold the containers that come off in floods of thousands at a time. The other part of the answer is fragility. The pandemic was a turning point. When ports in California backed up, container ships sat off the coast for weeks. Goods didn't arrive. Factories ran short of components. Shelves emptied. The world remembered something it had been ignoring for decades. Ports are the bottleneck of the entire global economy. If you can't unload, you can't ship. If you can't ship, you can't manufacture. If you can't manufacture, everything else stops. After that, countries stopped treating ports as utilities and started treating them as strategic assets. The same way countries treat power grids and pipelines and airports. Critical infrastructure that needs investment, redundancy, and capacity ahead of demand, not behind it. The scale is hard to picture. Standing on the edge of a modern megaport is a strange experience. The cranes are taller than 20-story buildings. They move on rails along the dock, picking containers off ships with a kind of mechanical precision that doesn't feel quite real. Each crane can move several containers a minute. A large terminal will have dozens of them running at once. The yard behind the dock stretches for miles. Containers stacked 5 and 6 high in lanes wider than highways. Automated trucks running between rows. Trains pulling in at the back of the yard to carry cargo inland. The entire system runs day and night with almost no pause. A single large terminal can move 10 million containers a year. The biggest ports move more than 40 million. The numbers stop meaning anything after a while. They just become weight and steel and noise that doesn't stop. What this kind of infrastructure does to a country is hard to overstate. A nation with a world-class port becomes a hub. Goods flow through it, jobs cluster around it, industries follow. A nation without one becomes a customer. It pays others to handle its trade. It accepts whatever schedule and whatever cost the bigger ports decide to charge. That difference is the engine driving the race. The engineering is brutal. Building a megaport from scratch is one of the hardest things humans build. You need natural deep water, or you have to dredge it, which means moving millions of cubic meters of sand and rock from the seabed. You need protected harbors, which means building breakwaters that can stretch for miles into open ocean and withstand storms that get worse every decade. You need stable ground for the dock, which often means driving foundations deep into seabed that wasn't designed to hold the weight of cranes and stacks of cargo. Then you need everything behind the dock: rail connections, highway access, power, water, customs facilities, warehouses, industrial zones for the cargo that gets processed locally before moving on. The port itself is maybe a third of the project. The hinterland around it is the rest. Some of the new ports are being built in places that, geographically, almost shouldn't work. Coastlines with shallow approaches that required years of dredging. Sites near reefs or wetlands that required engineering workarounds nobody had attempted at this scale before. Locations exposed to monsoon seasons that shut down construction for months at a time. Costs run into the tens of billions. Timelines stretch across decades. And the countries doing it keep building anyway, because the cost of not having a competitive port is, in the long run, much higher than the cost of building one. The map is being redrawn. For most of modern history, the world's trade map was concentrated in a few familiar places. The big European ports, the American coasts, the Asian giants like Shanghai, Singapore, Busan, Hong Kong. That map is now expanding fast. The Middle East is positioning itself as a transshipment hub between Asia and Europe. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman are all investing heavily in deepwater capacity. They sit at the intersection of three continents, and they're building infrastructure that makes them unavoidable. East Africa is being reshaped by new ports in Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. These are giving inland African countries access to global shipping that they've never really had at scale. Cargo from Uganda or Rwanda or Eastern Congo can now move out through ports designed for modern vessels rather than the smaller, older facilities that used to bottleneck the region. South America's Pacific coast, until recently almost an afterthought in global shipping, is being plugged in directly to Asia. The Chanque port is just the start. Mexico, Ecuador, and Chile are studying similar projects. Even Europe, which already has some of the most efficient ports in the world, is expanding. Rotterdam and Antwerp keep pushing capacity higher. New automated terminals are being added. The competition between European ports for cargo volume is fierce, because the port that handles the cargo also handles the customs, the value-added processing, and the regional distribution that comes with it. The trade map of 2040 is going to look noticeably different from the trade map of 2020. And the differences are being poured in concrete right now. Geography is everything. There's an old saying in shipping: the cargo doesn't care about borders. It cares about geography. A port's value comes down to where it sits. Is it close to a major shipping lane? Does it have natural deep water? Is the hinterland behind it productive enough to fill ships with exports and consume the imports? Are there rail and road connections moving cargo inland efficiently? Some locations have always had these advantages. Singapore sits at the entrance to the Strait of Malacca. Rotterdam sits at the mouth of the Rhine, with half of Europe behind it. Shanghai sits where the Yangtze meets the East China Sea. Other locations are being engineered into advantages they didn't naturally have. Ports being dredged to depths that wouldn't have been imaginable a generation ago. Land being reclaimed from the sea to extend terminal capacity. Industrial zones being built specifically to give the port enough local demand to justify expansion. This is the part that's quietly remarkable. Geography used to be fixed. Now it's something countries build. A coastline that was a fishing village 10 years ago can become a major regional hub if the investment and the timing align. A nation that was bypassed by global shipping for 2 centuries can suddenly become a critical node. The competitive landscape of global trade is no longer just about who has the best products or the cheapest labor. It's about who has the ports. The stakes are bigger than they look. A modern port isn't just a place where cargo moves. It's a center of gravity for an entire regional economy. The fees from passing ships add up to billions in revenue. The jobs at the port and in the surrounding logistics chain support hundreds of thousands of workers. The industrial zones built around major ports attract manufacturing, processing, and distribution operations that wouldn't otherwise locate there. The value-added activities, like assembling components, repackaging goods, and handling customs, generate revenue far beyond the basic port fees. A successful megaport can change the trajectory of a country. It can pull a nation from peripheral to central in global trade. It can shift industrial migration patterns. It can give a government leverage in trade negotiations that it didn't have before. It can quietly fund massive amounts of public investment from port revenue alone. These are the reasons countries are willing to spend $20, $30, sometimes $50 billion on a single port project. The cost is enormous. The return over decades is larger. Ports decide where economies grow. What comes next? The race isn't slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating. Climate change is reshuffling the deck. The Arctic is opening up new shipping routes during summer months, and Russia and Norway are positioning ports to handle that traffic. Rising sea levels are forcing existing ports to invest billions in protection or relocation. Storm intensity is making harbor protection a much bigger engineering problem than it used to be. Automation is changing what a port looks like internally. The newest terminals are running with far fewer workers than older ports of similar size. Cranes that operate autonomously, trucks that drive themselves around the yard, software that schedules every container movement weeks in advance. The jobs picture is shifting along with the physical infrastructure. Energy is being woven into port design. Shore power for docked ships to reduce emissions, battery storage, hydrogen refueling infrastructure for the next generation of cleaner vessels. The ports being built today are being designed for ships that don't fully exist yet. The next 20 years of global trade are going to be defined by the decisions being made now about where to dredge, where to build, where to invest. The countries that get those decisions right will sit at the center of the global economy. The countries that don't will be paying their neighbors for access. The map is changing in real time, not in lines on a chart, but in cranes rising along coastlines that used to be empty, in ships docking at ports that didn't exist a decade ago, in cargo moving through harbors that have been engineered out of nothing. The race for the next generation of megaports isn't really about ports. It's about who controls the arteries of the world economy for the next 50 years. Watch the coastlines. The future is being poured into them, one breakwater at a time.